Welcome into Other People's Shoes. As you know, I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Super excited. Now, got to stop you for a second before we get into the social medias and the website and all that other stuff. If you haven't done so already, please, I implore you, it is imperative. It is a directive from me. I don't often throw out directives or have-tos or musts. This is a must. Last week's conversation with Christina Dent is rattling around in my brain from the standpoint of her thought process was so different than I've ever encountered. What am I talking about? We probably should go back and listen to last week's episode. It's called The Shadow of Death. Now, in that episode, just to help set today's stage, we talked about this lady, Joanne. She's kind of a central character, if you will, from last week's episode. And so after Christina and I got done and we were talking, as we often do on the show with guests, and we thank them and do all of our nice things that we say and appreciation and respect and all that, I asked Christina a very important question. I said, do you still have connections with Joanne? And sure enough, she did. And so I am privileged, and I do really, truly consider it a privilege. I am privileged to introduce you to the central figure of last week's episode, Joanne. Joanne, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited about this. Truly honored for God to have used my ugly story and made it something beautiful. So thank you for recognizing that.
Well, absolutely. And I have to say, when she was retelling the event, when she first gets to the DHS office for Beckham's first visit, and she starts kind of walking back through that, she's getting him out of the van, and she's going to tell it way better than I do, but I'm going to try to retell it the best I can remember from her. But she's getting him out of the van, and she looks up, and she sees you sprinting towards her. As you get to her, you're kissing Beckham in his car seat, loving on him like a mom would. She's really having to force herself to kind of readjust even her thought process, because she's always had this thought, at that moment at least, drugs are bad. People who use drugs are bad. Moms that use drugs are even more bad or more terrible people because they've now put their baby in harm. And she's really wrestling with all of that as you're loving on your son. So that is what we're going to be walking through right now. But before we get to that, I do have to ask this most important question, and that's this. Joanne, what style of shoe do you like to wear?
I like the most comfortable pairs of shoes that you can put on your feet. My favorite is Blowfish. They are a very comfortable pair of tennis shoes. You can run in them, you can walk in them, you can dress them up, and you can dress them down.
Do you pick those up at the Mississippi Walmart, the Blowfish, or where do you find these at? I'm joking by Walmart because they have everything, by the way. It's not right. Well, she's in Mississippi, so naturally she shops at Walmart. I'm not saying that. People are already judging me, I know, but
I thought that's where you were about to go with it. I'm glad you cleared that up.
In all seriousness, I've never heard of that brand. I've heard of Hey Dudes. That's kind of popular. Even
well, they're kind of, I guess, on that same style a little bit. I just normally order mine offline, or I buy them at the shoe department close to my house. So they're known for not having shoelaces. They look like they should have shoelaces that are just missing. So a lot of different styles.
I just Googled them because I'm fascinated by these now, especially the no shoelace thing, which we'll get to that in April. We'll put a pin in that. People will reference it like, what? Put a pin? What? What about shoelaces? Just hold your breath. It'll come back in April. Don't worry.
That's right.
Full circle. But that's awesome. I'm getting a look at them now. Boy, they got some styles. So that's what you like to wear. That as you said, you can dress them up, you can dress them down. It doesn't matter.
That's probably my favorite shoe is a Blowfish.
Okay. I like it. I have some Vans if you're interested.
I like retired. Vans too.
Yeah.
I like Vans too.
I had to retire those because there's no arch support. And, at 42 almost, I need some arches, apparently. So, I don't know. I don't know what that means. So as we press forward, now I know you're in that Mississippi area, so it's kind of nice. We get to go back to back with Mississippi, so that's fun. Also, I love that geographical stuff. But as I retold that story, can you put me into your mindset of what you were feeling when you saw him get out of the van? Because I heard, as I said, Christina's we got into her mind. What's your mindset? As you're sprinting like Carl Lewis or Michael Johnson back in the day, both Olympic runners, as you're sprinting towards that van, what is your thought process? this?
So I'll give you a little backstory. I was actually 32 when I had Beckham. So I was a little later in life having him. Doctors had always told me that it would be very, very difficult, if, impossible for me to ever conceive a child. I had prayed for this child. I wanted a child really bad, and it just never was my time. I was never conceived. And part of my using, I can look back on it now and see that part of my using was because there was an emptiness. Everyone in my family had children. They were married. They were, moving forward. All my friends that I had grown up with, they all had children. And I was one of the only ones without children. So when I got pregnant with Beckham, he was my little blessing. He was my miracle baby. So I was so thankful for that. So when I had Beckham, when I had him that night or that morning, he was just the most amazing little thing. When I had Beckham, I did know that there was going to be a possibility of them taking him from me, because I knew I had been using my entire pregnancy. And so I spent 3 weeks he was in the hospital, and I spent every single day. I went to the hospital after he was born. I spent the max 2 hours with him in the NICU, was able to bond with him and was able to spend that special time with him. So when they came and took him from me, my heart just shattered. It was broken. Something that had been missing so long, I had finally had, and then yet to turn around and for him to be taken away from me again. So when I pulled up, I was actually in treatment at the time that we had that visit with Christina. They allowed me to take a day pass, because I was actually 2 hours north from where she was, and they allowed me to take a day pass to go see him and spend some time with him. I mean, the whole anticipation, the drive, I could feel my baby. I was ready to see my baby. So when she pulled into the parking lot, when she got him out, I didn't care who was around. I didn't care. I was supposed to do and what I was not supposed to do. I just knew that I was ready to see my son, because I had already bonded with him and just missed him so much.
So you talk about a 2-hour car ride.
So during that time, I was having to take a transportation because my vehicle was not with me, because the facility I was in would not allow your vehicles there. I was actually with a Medicaid transportation, and I was driving down, and I don't remember the particular driver that day, but I just remember talking about my son and getting very excited to see him, and just the anticipation of, when my son left my custody, there was never a question in my mind, was I going to get him back? It was almost like every day I worked towards getting him back. So every day was one day closer. And so when I went to go see him that day, I knew that this was just one step closer for me getting him back in my custody, but just the drive down there was just, it seemed like it took 10 hours, and so I was just ready to see my baby.
But I'm imagining you being in that car, the anticipation, the excitement. I remember when my daughter was born. She's 14 now. I still remember the day she was born. A couple of reasons why. One, the NBA draft was going on. I know people are like, really, Neil? But truly, that's also how I remember the day she was born, is Kevin Durant got drafted by the Seattle Supersonics. My wife's like, really? That's what you remember? But she was born in the afternoon. But I remember just at one point the next morning, so this is the 29th of June, the next day, I remember her laying in this little, we'll call it a bassinet, because it wasn't really, it was like a table that they had, but she was laying in that while my wife was resting. And I remember trying to get my finger, trying to get her to hold my finger and kind of talk to her and stuff. And I just remember thinking, nobody is ever going to hurt her. Nobody is ever going to come between me and her. That's it. I'm going to protect this little baby. But I imagine for a mom, it's a whole lot different than a dad. It truly is. I don't care, people can say what they want, but moms have a unique connection with babies that we will never understand. Moms and babies. We just won't as dads. I'm sorry. They grew inside you. They didn't grow inside of me. Help me with that car ride. What's the first thing you're thinking about when you see him? What's the first thing you're thinking about when you want to touch him and hold him and all that? Help me with that.
Some things, I will tell you, some of the emotions and the thought process in those first couple of months are really hard for me to grasp a hold of sometimes, because that was on the end of an 18-year addiction. So I was coming down off of a whole lot of drugs at one time. I can't really tell you exactly, the anticipation or the emotion, what was there. I just know that I was lost without my son. I know that I needed him with me, that God had given him to me, and it was my responsibility to take care of him. And I wasn't going to let anybody else else fill those shoes for me as a parent.
Love that a lot, especially filling those shoes. That's a good reference. But we should probably use that. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to walk back this out. Like, first off, you mentioned using drugs. You mentioned, an 18-year addiction. Now, the rules in Mississippi, probably much like most states, that if you're using, they're going to come take him. And yet, as a mom, we talk about, we shared that you had this like sprinter type speed to get to him as he pulls up and you're loving on him. But if you truly loved him, why would you, one, use knowing full well he's going to be taken from you, but two, the harm and the challenges and the hurdles that you're putting in front of him while you're using when you're pregnant? Help me understand that from your standpoint.
Okay, so I'll just let you know, I started off when I was about 12, 14 with, just experimenting around recreational, and it was a part of my life for a very long time. The later years of my addiction, for probably about 4 or 5 years, I previously used when I was younger, but then I reused again meth. And up until that point, I was able to function. I was able to have a job. I was able to, somewhat function as a productive member of society, yet I was still in that spiral of addiction, but it was maintained. So then the last 5 years of my addiction, there was a lot of trauma there. I had a lot of trauma that had happened over the course of from 12 to 32, which about was 25 when I started using meth again. There was a lot of trauma that had happened during that time. I was just coming out of a very abusive relationship. I was married for 9 years. Marriage was just toxic in any form or fashion, verbal, mental, and emotional abusive. And so when I finally escaped him, I went to using harder substance a lot. Up until that point, he kind of controlled my using a little bit, if you would say. And then at that point, when I left, there was no controlling it. I was on my own to use it. My life began to spiral horribly. Up until this point, I had never been arrested. I had never had any misdemeanor, felony, no charge at all. In 2012, I believe, was when I caught my first felony, my first charge. And from that time till 2 years later, I had 7 misdemeanors and 3 felonies. I had gotten that in just about a 1.5 to 2 year time span. Mind you, this is when my son was conceived during this time, really on the end part of my using. At this point, my life was so damaged and so just broken. And I know that other people, that are not addicts and have never dealt with it, they don't understand that. But when I tell you it is the most darkest place of your life that you could be, there were times that I just felt paralyzed. I would sit on my fireplace, I remember, and just feel completely paralyzed because there was so much damage that had happened to me. So when I had my son, it was not like, oh, well, I have him, well, all this trauma and all of this pain and it's gone. That is not what happened for me. I wish it would have been. When I first got pregnant, I found out on Mother's Day of 2015 that I was pregnant. Mother's Day previously had been a very, very difficult day for me because, once again, I wanted children. Everybody else had children. Everybody else was celebrated, and I was not. So I remember when I found out I was pregnant, I was so excited that day. And I just remember sitting in my bathroom, and I called my mom right away. Something else I'll add in there is that my son's father is one of my dealers that I had at the time. So this wasn't a relationship. This was just strictly a dealer. And so when I found out, I was so excited. I was just like, okay, this is the break that I needed in my life, because I really believed when I found out that I was pregnant with Beckham, that everything was going to absolutely change in my life. When I was a child, I would see women that were smoking cigarettes and they would be pregnant. And I would just remember thinking to myself, I would never smoke a cigarette while I was pregnant with a child. So I just was so excited. I just thought that was going to be my magic pill. But when I found out I was pregnant with Beckham, like I say, it was the Saturday before Mother's Day of 2015. And I was able to sit there and just be so excited. And I called my mom, and, and I thought my mom was going to be angry with me because, not only was I going to have the challenges of my son, dad being a dealer, but also my son was going to be biracial. And so I thought that my mom, being here in the South, I thought that it was going to be a major issue with my family. My mom was excited for me because she knew that that was a child that I always wanted. So for the first 2 or 3 days, I was able to stay clean. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. Then after that, I remember I went to the health department and they gave me a confirmed date. They told me in the beginning that his due date was going to be December the 25th, Christmas baby. And I just, once again, I thought that was a God wink. This is going to be my gift from God. And so I really thought that I was going to be able to stay clean from that time forward. And I was clean for about 2 or 3 days. That addiction started calling me again. And, I'll never forget. And I can almost... The craziest thing is, I can't remember different emotions and things, but I can remember exactly where the drugs were in my house, exactly what I used to do it with and everything. I can almost visually close my eyes and see it, and just looking down on it in so much disgust and disgrace. And I couldn't say no to it anymore. And I just remember using a substance and I remember looking at myself and thinking, here we go again. I thought it was going to be enough and it was not. It was really disappointing. And so then I went into some shame and some guilt. The enemy likes to work on us in shame and guilt and feeling negative and that we are worthless and we are useless. And so then it started a whole new experience for me. I was using, and so I lived in shame and guilt, but the cycle was so ugly that it had already started. I just continued to use during my pregnancy. And I remember so many times saying, okay, this is the first trimester. Just to kind of tell you where I was in my addiction, I would Google, methamphetamine while you're pregnant and what can it be? And I remember one time, and I know this is going to sound so sick, but I remember one time looking it up and it's saying that having a child on meth is basically the same thing as the crack epidemic when there were a lot of crack babies born, and that they could survive and that they could be okay, but that they could just have some behavioral issues after they were born. And so I know this sounds sick, but I'm just going to be honest that I felt, okay, well, he's not going to have a physical delay or he's not going to have this kind of disability. He should be okay. Remember reading that if I could just use during my first trimester, then in my second trimester, I would quit. Got through the first trimester and then the second trimester came. And, and it was that time that I was like, okay, this is really it. After this trimester, I'm done. The third trimester came, and this was when I started counting down the days, because at this point they had moved my due date to January the 6th. And so in my mind, in my sick, twisted mind, I told myself that on, around New Year's Eve, I needed to quit using. So that would give me time to get the drugs out of my system, and that I would be able to have him and he would be clean and he would be able to go home with me and everything was going to be fine. And that was not the case. That's not what happened. When I was 31 weeks and 2 days pregnant was when I went into labor. I was with my brother, who was actually another one of my people that I would get my substance from. And I was at his house, and I'm not going to get too graphic with it, but my water had broke and I thought that something else was going on. So I changed my clothes. I, did this 3 or 4 times throughout the day as I was still looking for drugs and still getting high. 31 weeks. And I just remember, that whole day getting it. And then that evening, I looked at my brother and he was, handing me some substance, and he just looked at me and he shook his head. And I knew when he shook his head what he was telling me. He was telling me, you don't need to do this anyway. And I know that even sounds twisted too. My brother, it was like he was controlling my using. He's another part of my story, but for way different episodes. He was there during that time. And I just looked at him and I said, so do you think I should call my doctor? And he said, yeah, you should call your doctor. And so I called my doctor and I asked him, I said, is this normal? He said, absolutely not. He said, you need to get down to the hospital right away. And so, mind you, I was around my brother. I was around my best friend at the time. I was around a house full of people, and nobody would take me to the hospital. Everybody was scared because everybody was in their own using and a really bad place that they didn't want to have to be a part of any of this, because they knew it was not going in a good place. I drove myself to the hospital after my water had broken. I had been driving around for hours, for a whole day, just, kind of to put a little ad in there, that just shows you how God's grace is and how his mercy is. No reason my son should be okay. Anyway, so I went and I had him that that night. And it was on November the 16th of 2015 I went into the hospital November the 15th of 2015, and I had him that morning or that evening. I talked to the nurses, and I even asked the nurses, I said, do you think that y'all could just hold him in for a couple of more days so the drugs could get out of my system so my baby can go home with me? I was in such a selfish place of denial that all I wanted was my son to go home, because at this point, it wasn't for him. It wasn't for me. It was the fact that I had been lying to so many people, lying to so many people in my family, so many other people. They thought that I had quit using during my pregnancy. And I knew at this time I was going to have faced with some consequences. So the nurses were like, they were really sweet to me. And they were like, I don't know. We'll talk to the doctor. We'll wait until he gets here and see what he says. And so when he got to the hospital, he looked at me and I said, so do you think you can keep him in for a couple of days? And he said, well, with your extracurricular activities, he said, no, we're going to have to take him tonight. And so at 8:59 the next morning was when I had Beckham.
There's so many things that are just cascading into my brain right now. I was trying to write them as fast as I could. I think the first thing I want to lead with is I've never done meth. Let me just be clear. I've smoked cigars. I've obviously had some alcohol in my life. I walked through an addiction that was not drug related. So I can kind of get into the addict mindset of wanting it, needing it, doing harm to myself in a mental sense. But for me, when I hear somebody, walk us back through that, it didn't sound like you were around a lot of supportive people that really, try to hold you accountable, tried to say to you, Joanne, there's a better way. That's what I'm hearing. I'm also wondering, so I want to set that on the table. Maybe we'll just make that the saucer, and we'll just leave that there with the broccoli, because I'm not a fan of broccoli. So we'll just kind of set that on the table next to the broccoli and the peas, maybe, because I hate those two things. But what I'm also wondering about, when you said about Beckham's dad being one of your dealers, what immediately popped into my head, and by the way, you have said from the onset, you're an open book. We can kind of ask whatever. I mean, obviously we're not going to ask inappropriate stuff, but we can kind of have some extra leeway, if you will. So here's what popped into my head. Did you trade sex for drugs?
Well, now tell you, it's taken me a while. It took me a while to be able to come to terms with that, because in my mind then, no, I really liked him. He loved me. He cared about me. Only reason I ever slept with him, he was a dealer. I was going to look the part because I could get drugs whenever I wanted to, although he still charged me. It took one of my first counselors to tell me, you were a trick. And when she said that, I just got blown away. I was like, absolutely not. And then she said, well, did you ever trade sex for drugs? And I was like, and so then I had to come to terms with that.
Well, people can't see, and you probably can't see because the lettering's really bad, but my shirt says Redemption. It's in honor of the 2017 North Carolina team. The year prior, they had lost in a really catastrophic way on a last-second three-point shot. I still have not gone back to watch that highlight. But I got this shirt mainly because I like the word redemption. And so when I say that word redemption, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear that word?
Saved by grace and mercy. Not getting a penalty that I should have gotten. Completely being washed. Completely going from one way to another without blemish. God starting fresh. It's kind of what comes to mind.
Are you worthy of redemption?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because I'm human, because I'm made of flesh, and I'm not God, that there is only one. Through him, he makes me worthy, and he makes me valuable for redemption.
So I don't know how old you are now. I'm not asking you to tell us by any means, because I have some tact. People don't believe that. Truly, I do have some tact. You put that number in your head, whatever that is right now, and then go back in time to the 13-year-old you. What the heck would you tell that young little girl?
Hold on, sister. We got a wild ride ahead of us. This is kind of a tricky question, because if my life would not have turned out the way it is now, I may have told her, listen to the people around you, dig more into God, stay into church, discover who you are. Don't worry about boys. Don't get into relationships. That's probably what I would tell her. But because God used every ugly day, every ugly minute, every ugly second of my life from 13 to now, and he has made something so beautiful. The whole time he was behind the tapestry, just creating something beautiful for the other side. And the back side of the tapestry is not clean and cut and beautiful like the front. So without all that ugliness on the back, how would it have that beauty on the front? And so being where I am today, having a relationship with God the way I do today, and being plugged in where I am today, I would probably just tell that girl that we're going to make it. We are going to get on the other side.
Would she believe you?
Probably not. Well, the first thing I would say, the first scenario I gave you, she would absolutely just rebel against it because I was very rebellious at a very young age. The second part, she'd probably say, well, let me go test the waters and let me see what fun we're about to have.
We have a campaign here in Southern Oregon. It's called Don't Do Meth, Not Even Once. Again, I mentioned my 14-year-old daughter. She's growing up. I always say 14 going on 25 because it seems like some days she's 14, other days it feels like she's 25. For me, when I ask you this question, parent to parent, what would you tell parents out there who may have children struggling or may have children kind of wanting to experiment with drugs? Because again, I know what your friend Christina says, and I'm almost half tempted to ask you this question. Do you agree with her? Should everything be legal? And then we should be like, having like people go to like a pharmacy and having it prescribed to them. Help me with that, because would that have helped you? I know I asked you a ton of questions there, so pick and choose whatever you want.
Going back to the parents, what I would say to the other parents, allow your children to tell you the truth and not shame them because of the truth. Because for me, I did grow up in a very Christian family. There were things in my life that were never talked about. And it was almost like if you had that thought, you were going to hell. Or if you had that thought, you would go into shame and guilt. The saying that your children are going to find out, just who are they going to find out from, is really true. And if it was true X amount of years ago, it's absolutely true, if not amplified 1,000 times from when it was then. So your children are going to find out. And then also, again, it's that sinful nature that is put in us as children. There's things that I remember being as a child that nobody ever showed me, but I just knew, because that's the sin in me. Don't put your children in shame when they try to come and talk to you. Yeah, consequences, you got to have consequences, but not every time they tell you, they hung out with this friend, they're doing drugs. Well, automatically, you don't want your children to hang out with those children. But if you tell your child they can't, then they're going to go with them even more. So be proud that your child came to you and told you that their friend was smoking weed or stealing alcohol from their parents or something like that. Just be open with them, about that. To the question about Christina, it's funny because Christina and I have never discussed this.
You've got to, okay, I got to interrupt. You have got to be kidding me. You have never had this question asked?
We haven't. We have not. And I know that sounds crazy, but we just haven't.
It does. It absolutely does. I almost want to email her right now and say, what is the problem here? Okay.
So, because, our stories have been, since we met, it's been so parallel and we've just kind of walked with each other through it. It's not like, well, I don't agree with that, or I do agree with this, or let's do this, or so I do believe in consequences. I do believe that I'm not going to say not everybody should go to jail or to prison. And I've listened, and I actually just listened the other day to one of her TED Talks. Again, one of the first times she ever, I think, introduced me to the public was on one of her TED Talks. And I listened to it again, and she is so smart and wise where she is with that, talking about the stadium, that there's more people that drink alcohol on the outside of the, just kind of talking about all that. I don't know if you've watched any of those. Christina was there when I was sentenced because I did have something that stuck with me and I was sentenced, and she was there for my sentencing that day. She was there with me walking hand in hand, and she heard a guy then that was being sentenced, and she just really did not agree with him being sentenced to the 14 years. I think that's what he was going to get. And, I believe that I don't think it needs to be your first go-to for them to go to prison. I'll give you a scenario. A couple of weeks ago, I actually work in a court setting now. And I was in court and we were having a sentencing, and there was a young man in there, and he was being sentenced for something. He had never been given the opportunity of treatment ever. No one ever came to him and said, hey, look, why don't you try out treatment? Or, you know what? This is a stipulation of your probation. This is a stipulation of your parole to go to treatment. He was never given that opportunity. So this young man was sent away for a very, very long time. And at this point, there was nothing else that could be done. That his sentence had to be his sentence. But, it should have been in the beginning. He should have had the opportunity to go to treatment or, something like that. And so I do believe that treatment and spending more of our money into treating the problem before it becomes a problem, or instead of sending them to prison, I do believe that is the best solution. But I also believe in consequences. I also believe that sometimes people need to go sit down, and sometimes God puts people in prison to sit them down. Take my brother, for example. My brother was a really, really heavy user, dealer, a lot of things, and he was sent to federal and state prison for 3 years. In the beginning of that, I thought that was the absolute worst thing that could have ever happened to him. He was a dealer too, so that's a little bit different. He was definitely a user. His using is what got him to dealing to support himself. In the beginning of that, it was just the most horrible thing. On the tail end of it, after we saw him getting clean, and after we saw he stayed clean from the time he got to prison to the time he got out, and he was around drugs the whole time in prison. So he could have used if he didn't want to. And now he is completely changed. In his setting, I believe prison was the best thing for him. So I don't believe it's everybody, but I do believe that we have to do better as a whole. Something has to change because the way we're doing things are not, it is, let's put them away. It's not, let's, get them healthy. It's more or less, let's put them away and make them punished. We should find grace and not being so much about the punishment, but about the problem. So I do agree with her in a lot of areas.
And I just think that's mind blowing that you guys have never really sat down and had a meal together or, coffee. You have coffee in Mississippi, right?
I love it.
Okay. All right. Just kidding, of course.
We're not that backwoods.
I have my visions of Mississippi and they're not pleasant. Let me just be honest.
Whatever, you have a vision of Mississippi. So I don't know if you know anything about the Mississippi Delta. I live in the Delta. So God took me out of Jackson and put me in the Delta. So that's even worse than where I was originally. So,
I'm going to take your word for it because I don't know any of those places. I look on a map and I can see Jackson, but that's about it. That's awesome. Joanne, first off, I want to just compliment you. And I know we've had some fun. We've had some laughs and maybe even almost some tears. I know you kind of held back a little bit, which is okay. It's fine. But I truly want to say you and I never met until this moment. And for you to come on and be willing to share and walk through some very dark, paralyzing, shadowy moments, to me says a lot about you and your character, says a lot about you as a person, says about you a lot as a mom. So what's the end of the story? We know Beckham as a baby. We know you do end up getting him back. Christina did allude to that. But where are you guys now? Where is the present you and Beckham together? And by the way, so where are you now? And then how did you get his name? What does his name mean to you?
So Beckham, actually my brother, the one you've heard about my brother and I are really close. My brother, when I was pregnant, he had a daughter and he said, if been a boy, I would have named her Beckham Suede. And I was like, I love it. And so that was just the name. I knew that if I was going to have a boy, his name was going to be Beckham Suede, and it stuck. There's never been a day that's gone by that I thought, man, I wish I would have named him something different. Like, he's got a cool name and I love it.
I do like his name because I thought of immediately David Beckham, and I'm not even a soccer guy, but I did think David Beckham or Bend It Like Beckham and all that comes into play. But yeah.
Definitely not a Mississippi name. Definitely not a Mississippi
I was judging
name.
a little bit. I'm like, that seems like a little LA, metropolitan, not downtown Jackson, Mississippi. Right. Kind of thing. But you guys are back together. Does he carry any regret or any anger towards you for any of your choices? I know you can't necessarily speak for him, but have you perceived that any way as a mom?
He does. But I'm going to go back to the first question about where we are now because I want you to know where we are now. So Beckham was away from me for I think it was about 3 weeks. He was released from the hospital on, I believe, the 9th. And to tell you, last night I heard Christina, I was listening to her podcast, and I never knew that Thomas was the one that said, let's have Beckham. Let's let this kid, we think this kid should come. I thought that was pretty cool because they may have told me, but I didn't remember that part.
Thomas being Christina's husband.
Right. So I thought that was kind of neat. But so Beckham was only with them for like 3 weeks because God moved so quick, because a part I left out was while I was in the hospital. While I was pregnant, I did go to get evaluated and it worked for my advantage. It moved the process up about a week. So I was able we had the shelter hearing right the day after he was put into their custody, taken from me and went to theirs. And the judge allowed him to come with me. They said said that it would be okay, but he needed some more information about the facility because I went to one of the only facility. There's only 2 facilities in Mississippi that allows the children to go with their moms in treatment. And I went to one of those, and it just happened to be 2.5 hours north of where I was living in Jackson. Went there. And so he came for about 3 weeks later, and just right away, we haven't even gotten into all this, but God placed so many amazing people in my path along the way. The hospital, my CPS worker, my foster parents. These are all people that I still have contact with today. I still talk to the CPS worker occasionally. Christina and I are still really close. The chaplain that was in the hospital, everybody that was there in the beginning parts are still in my life today, even if it's just not on Facebook, but we stay connected. And so when I had Beckham and he came to me in treatment, that was just the best day of my whole entire life, was to have him come with me in treatment. I wound up staying there, and I was only going to go for 35 days to treatment, wound up staying a little bit longer and did the transition, which was an additional 60-day program. And then after that, that's when God had already started really working on my heart, but was really changing my heart that maybe I needed to stay a little bit longer. When I went, my mom said, well, you might need to stay there for a year. And I was like, okay, you're just trying to put me away now, and I just remember being so angry with her for saying that to me. So I wound up staying for independent living, and independent living is basically like a sober living in that facility. You're allowed to work. You're allowed to still stay at the facility. And because I was a mom, I couldn't actually go to the independent living house. I stayed at the facility, and I worked in the nursery. So, I was able to take Beckham with me to work every single day. He lived with me. He never even stayed with anyone else until he was 8.5, almost 9 months old. I'm talking not even a minute away from me from the time he came from Christina to me. And so that just kind of blossomed, and I wound up staying to the independent living and wound up getting a job and got a position at the adolescent facility, because we have an adolescent facility and an adult facility at the place that I work. And the adolescent facility, I was the weekend person there, and I worked with the children, and it was really neat to be able to do that. After about 3 years was when Beckham started school or Head Start, and I knew that I needed to be more of a stable. I didn't need to be gone on the weekends. I needed to be there, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. Because the weekend position was a little bit different. I was off Monday through Thursday, but I had to work from Friday to Sunday. And so prayed about it. And God, something happened where I was able to go across the street to Fairland and be back with the women and children. So I worked there, and I'm currently working there. Been there for about 3 years now. I've worked for Region 1 for almost 6. Now I also work for drug court in my area. I am the case manager for the drug court, and so that's where me and Beckham are. We're here up in the Delta, plugged into a really, really good church, and, some cool things have just started recently happening there. My pastor and I and some other people have started to celebrate recovery at our church. And so God's plugging me in on that. Just a lot of other really cool things that continue to happen. Now, to answer your question about Beckham is angry, I believe, with me. I do believe that he does have a lot of resentment from that. I don't think he knows what it is, but there are some anger issues. His father's not in his life. He wants to know his dad really, really bad. And I just have to tell him that his dad makes bad choices, and that if his dad ever decides to make good choices, that he would be able to see his dad. I don't tell him, he's only 6, so I don't tell him, oh, your dad doesn't want to see you, and so he just knows that his dad's not there. My father was a very, very strong male figure in his life. He was very, very close to my dad. And August of 2020, my dad had a stroke and passed away unexpectedly. So my son is very angry about his papaw. Although this August will be 2 years, he is, he'll get really mad and real angry, and he'll tell me, I want my papaw, and ever since my papaw died, you're mean to me, and different things like that. I do have him in therapy. He's been in therapy for quite a while. And then I actually had taken him out of therapy for a little bit, dealing with some behavior issues with him. And here recently, it's kind of struck up again. So he has started back in therapy now. And, I just do a lot of praying. I know that this is a season. I know that God is going to get it. I just feel like this is another part of our story, and I just feel like God is going to allow me to walk through this, because there are other moms that are going to have children that don't have dads and that have been. And I do believe that part of it is my addiction, that different things that were in his body as a child. I mean, I think it could be a repercussion of it, but I'm not ready to throw in the towel yet. I know that we're going to get on the other side of this. And like I say, this is just going to be something else I can relate to other women with children that have the same issues with them. But right now we're going through a lot. He stays on red and yellow at school. Teachers are really working with him and very patient with him and with me, because I'm not just a mom that allows my child to go to school. I have to text the teacher every single day at lunch. And so, so they get, but she's so great. Anytime I'm like, I'm sorry. She's like, no, you're being great. We wish that other parents were like that. And, so they deal with me and with him, but we're going to get on the other side of it.
And the red and the yellow is behavior. Like red is bad. Like we had a bad day. Yellow is good, or help me with that.
Right. And look, and I'm going to tell you, his teacher is so amusing that he has a behavior chart, and it has it every day. It tells if it's a red dot, green dot, yellow dot, whatever. And there are days that she will circle the whole entire square and make it a huge red dot. And I know as as parent to teacher that he really cut up that day. But I already normally know what it's about because, like I say, I text her every day. And then sometimes she'll do, and this is the funniest. She'll put a itty bitty green dot, and when she does an itty bitty green dot, I know that he barely made it on green, but he got there.
My daughter also, back to her, she'll be embarrassed when she hears this back. She spit in the classroom, spit on the carpet, and when the teacher asked her why she did that, she said, well, we do that at home all the time. So that's awesome. And then she also paid a kid a quarter, which ended up being like 5 pennies. So we had to work on change to do her math homework. So there was that. Yeah, that was in elementary school. Now we're in high school, so I'm still like waiting for the other proverbial shoe to drop, so to speak.
Right.
She's really mellowed out, though, in all fairness. She's become my wife, which is fantastic, because if she's like me, holy smokes, we're in for some painful memories. But Joanne, we wrap up today. I just want to thank you. I want to thank you so much. You've been really amazing. My last question that I want to leave our listeners with is this: what keeps you clean?
Having a strong relationship with God, and not just my relationship with God, but the fact that I have worked so hard to get to where I am today. I have worked through so much trauma. I've worked through so much behavioral issues, things that were just embedded in my brain. I don't, and it's not anything. I mean, my relationship with God keeps me clean. Using is not even an option today. It's not like there's never been where, when my dad passed, I did think, oh, it'd be nice to take a pill right now. But the thought, went ahead really quickly. It's just not even an option today to use. I don't want to go back to that dark place. It was the very darkest point of my life. And today, my life is nothing but beautiful and good things and joy and God. And I can't think of a scenario of anything that could happen in my life that would make me want to go back to that dark place, because it's not a fun place. And I think a lot of people think that addiction is a good place for us, and it's not. It's a very, very dark place. If someone struggles with depression, can kind of relate. That's what it is. It's a severe case of depression. You're just in a really dark, ugly spot.
Yeah. And I think that's the part I love most probably about your story, is the fact that you've made choices to not only stay clean, but now you're helping others. I think that to me is the most probably rewarding for you as well, because again, you've walked in those shoes. You know what it feels like to have your son, I'm not going to say ripped away from you, but in a lot of respects, probably your heart being ripped away when you saw him being taken that night with the social worker, or that morning with the social worker. So yeah, good stuff. Are you up for a game? Are you okay with games? I don't know how you feel about games. All right, here we go. So it's a silly game that we like to call Senseless. Now, it's just silly. I'm not going to get into the senses. It's created a worldwide debate of how many we have, how many we don't. I don't know. I'm not even going to know. I used to think we had 5, but now people have corrected me 1,000 times. So I'm not even going to ask you how many we have. But I am going to say that I have this handy dandy North Carolina cup. I know you're probably not a sports fan. Right now, if anything, you could be a praying woman for my Tar Heels, because they really need some help right now. They're bad. they're really bad right now. And it's really painful for me as a fan to watch. Here we are. I'm going to roll for you. If you're okay with that, you're going to trust that I'm going to roll well on your behalf?
I do, and I trust that your team's going to win next time, too.
Thank you, because we're terrible. We got beat by our arch rival. I'm not even going to say their name.
Now, I'm going to pray when we get off and watch. They're going to win next time.
I really hope so, because I've been praying, and I feel like God doesn't care if my prayer. Maybe because I'm not in the South. I don't know. It's weird that I'm in the wrong state, as everyone tells me all the time. You live in Oregon, and you have all this North Carolina stuff. Get over yourself, okay? Get over yourself. All right, so here we go. I'm going to roll on your behalf. A number one. I think Christina got this one too. So number one. That is a number one. I know it looks like a North Carolina logo, but trust me, it's a number one. How do you want others to see you?
As someone that is very strong, independent, loves God first, is a good mom, that has had some rough times, but I'm thankful for those because it honestly has truly, I know it sounds cliche, but it has made me who I am. And it's the only reason I'm where I am today and where I can give back to others and walk in their shoes.
And should people go listen to last week's episode with Christina? We'll maybe ask you that too. Tell me how you feel about her.
And God put her in my path at the right exact moment. And I don't know if Christina has told you this or not, but we were both homeschooled. She was homeschooled and so was I. We actually, this is, another God wink. We actually homeschooled together. Our parents knew each other. We were at homeschool conventions and functions together growing up. I mean, I'm sure I played with her. We're only a couple of months apart. So I'm sure I played with her at some point. And then all those years later, we had not seen each other, talked to each other or anything. And then God reunites us this way. She is the person that you see. She, at the point in her life where she didn't know about me, like it's funny for me to hear some of these things that she was really thinking then, because she never made me feel, even though that's the way she thought and what her mindset was, she still treated me with love and compassion. And I thought she was just over and beyond, calling me and asking me. She made a really important phone call to me one day and asked me if I wanted my son where I wanted his pediatrician to be and if I wanted him to have a pacifier or not. And this was when he had been with her for a couple of days, and she did not have to call and ask me that. And she thought that I was a little sketchy at the time, but yet she still did that. So to me, that just shows the God in her, that she was able to put that aside and still accept me for where I was and allow me to have a voice, even when I didn't really deserve one. So yeah, I think she's pretty great. I thought
you might say that. So just wanted to give you an opportunity to really thank her publicly because, that's kind of nice. All right, kids and campers, guys and gals alike. I don't know about anybody else. I absolutely love what happened today. I really do. I really love the fact that for a lot of us, and maybe this is you right now, I bet it is on some level. Think about all the stuff you've done in the dark. Now, I know some of you are automatically thinking bad things. Good, think of them. That's okay. But I remember as a kid, sneaking out at a campground. I know this is a weird story. We actually broke into the speaker at church camp's room and we were going to shave his eyebrows. We only did it in the middle of the night because we weren't going to be seen. Terrible. He woke up. We didn't end up doing it. I still wish we had not woken him up. But nonetheless, I say that because back in those days, I was trading a lot of things in the darkness to be liked, to be accepted, to be thought about, to be appreciated, to be admired. And I'm wondering about you. Have you traded things in the dark, in the shadows, that maybe it's time we stop trading them and really start stepping into the light and come out of that shadowy, wintry state that we've been talking about and come into the light of spring? And I believe Joanna illustrated that for us so well. So let me challenge you on that today. What is your thing that you're trading in the dark? And are you done trading it? Are you done with it? Are you ready to put it aside and stop allowing it to paralyze you? And are you ready to walk into the amazing warmth of the sunlight? Let me know if you do. OPSpodcast.com, of course, is a great place to let me know. There is a connections page there. There's a voicemail there. You can leave such information there. You, of course, can also reach us at the social media of your choice, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under the handle OPS Podcast Show. A little different than the website, but just connect with us there. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget this as we leave. Do not forget this. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. Thank you so much for listening, and stay tuned till next week when we walk in other people's shoes.